Say hello to the selected ones. Don't annoy your opponent when they're hurting themselves. But bring popcorn because Divine Humiliation is a lengthy movie. Now lean in because what you're about to hear is more than just a story. This twist will leave you speechless. The loudest, rockiest, and most arrogant clown in your story thought they were the leader, but they turned out to be the joke that no one wanted to laugh at anymore. Let's talk about when the room transformed. A study at the University of Michigan found that people who are overly convinced of themselves not only perform worse under pressure, but they also don't realize it until it's too late. Now add spiritual arrogance to the mix, and you have a walking circus that is about to end. And now is when it becomes real. You didn't scream. You didn't strike him with a jab. You didn't even get sweaty. You simply came there, got in line, chose, and were entirely in your beautiful body. The rest, everyone witnessed them do it to each other. People who are full of themselves think they can't be touched until the crowd stops clapping. And when you stepped into that moment, you didn't just take over the room. You flipped it around like a plot surprise that no one expected coming. They thought it would be a roast. That was their public punishment, it turns out. And you were like, oh, you did this episode? That's what it's all about. The so-called leader was spiritually pantsed in front of their loyal little followers. And now all the folks who used to laugh with them are choking on the smoke of their failure. Get some water. Drink a lot of water. You're going to watch the moment that altered everything and made everyone who saw it go, wait a minute. What just took place? Let's get going. First, you didn't respond. You let their ego die on stage on purpose. You didn't even need to shout. You didn't call them names, hit them, or act like they did. And yet, everyone in the room witnessed them fall apart while you stayed calm, steady, and completely unbothered. That was what worried everyone the most. You didn't cheat. You didn't throw shade. You didn't need to. You let their pride do all the work. And in the end, it brought them all the way down. They thought they were fooling you, but they were really putting on a show. All for show, a loud voice, a flashy attitude, and fake confidence. They needed people to look. They wanted people to be powerful, yell and laugh. But when you didn't want to play, their performance started to fade away like a balloon that had popped. You didn't just say no to the drama. You didn't give it food. If a clown doesn't get a reaction, the spectacle falls apart. You didn't simply sit there. It was right on. You let them use their own words, lives, and pride to construct the rope. Every time they made fun of you, tried to humiliate you, or behaved like they were better than you, you gave them room. And that's what killed them. Because they weren't meant to be viewed without talking. They weren't intended to stand on their own without harming someone else. The more they spoke, the more clear it became. They were trying to make up for something they couldn't pretend to be anymore. People who used to clap started to look to the side one day. People's faces changed. The laughing stopped. Some folks were having trouble breathing. And not because you said anything, but because the mask fell off right in front of them. They were so sure of themselves until they discovered that they had been acting uneasy the whole time. And there you were. Not broken, not angry, not even pushed. You let the situation play out exactly as it needed to. And that made them feel horrible. Worse than any insult ever. Could you let the truth speak for you and for what is true? Truth never misses. There was never any stillness. It was a plan. You acted like you knew how it would end. That made it all the worse. Second, they were doing it for applause while you were in control. They were loud and dramatic and always wanted a stage. They walked into every room with an attitude, trying to take over conversations, make fun of you, and make everyone else believe they were in control. But deep down, they did all they could to seek attention. They needed someone to pay attention to them. They wanted to feel powerful since they were just smoke and mirrors when they weren't in the limelight. You didn't need a lot of friends to be powerful. You really did have energy. You weren't doing your job, even if other people didn't notice. You were working together. That's what made it so inconsistent. They were playing a game of perception while you were standing. They made their image with smoke, charm, and loud sounds, thinking that no one would notice how empty it all was. But you didn't need to yell. You didn't have to show anything. You walked with a serene confidence that didn't require anybody else to agree with you. That was the difference between the two of you. They were doing well because people were paying attention to them. You were driven by a goal. They needed sound. You were there. And when the truth finally came out, it hit them like a train. People started to see the difference for the first time. You were clearer than they were pleasant. Because you were so elegant, their jokes didn't work. They were attempting to make you laugh, but there was something deeper that everyone could feel that was holding you up. It wasn't only that you stayed calm that made the room shake. It was because your energy was too powerful to be moved. People realized that the person they had been laughing with was the one who was truly insecure, and the one they were attempting to make fun of was the one who was actually in command. They lost control since they weren't sure of what to do. It was created just for you. That's why it was so hard to handle. You didn't win by talking. You said something to me. When the truth came out, the program fell apart. People ceased giving applause. I stopped following them. Without you even asking for it, respect started to alter in your favor. That's hardly a lucky break. That's what happens when a person who is full of themselves meets a person who is spiritually right. You didn't have to do anything. You already had the crown. 3. You were what they said you were. The scenario felt different since you weren't trying to win. You weren't trying to show anybody up, steal the show, or prove anything. They had a hard time with it since you just being yourself. Because you were everything they aspired to be. They were busy putting up a show, but you were living what they could only mimic. No lying, no showing off, just being honest. And it revealed everything. They wanted everyone to believe they were smart, tough, and impossible to break. They turned it into a whole human. They were noisy and full of energy, and everyone was paying attention to them. But in the middle of all that noise, someone was praying in dread. No one would know that they weren't really who they claimed they were, that their confidence was a front, and that their power came from controlling the tale, not who they actually were. But then you came in softly, forcefully, and without saying sorry. You don't perform any stunts or shows, you're just there. That's when things started to go wrong. People began to notice the difference. You didn't make them do anything, yet all of a sudden their voice sounded different. Their jokes weren't humorous at all. People could see the difference between what was real and what was scripted, so their energy didn't attract people's attention anymore. That's why it hurts so much. It has nothing to do with what you did. It was about what you didn't have to do. You didn't have to be loud, rude, or call people out. While they were struggling through their act, you were really just walking about. And the more you kept true to yourself, the less steady they were in the parts they were playing. You hurt their feelings without even trying. The greatest kind of guilt is when someone realizes they've squandered all their energy trying to beat someone who wasn't even in the same race. The show went wrong, not because you said anything bad about it, but because you were so honest that it appeared dumb. You didn't only live through the moment you turned the mirror back on them. And when they looked, all they saw was someone trying to be like you in a manner that they could never be. That's not a shadow. That's the fourth thing that has been revealed. The workers watched their boss be fired for moral grounds. They used to move together, a loud, cocky gang that followed their leader like they were unstoppable. It was always the same as you walked into the room. The one person they thought knew everything orchestrated the snickers, harsh stares, and subtle jabs. They were convinced of themselves since they were following someone they believed was in charge. But just one moment of truth was enough to bring the whole thing down. The same people who used to laugh at you were quiet when they witnessed this so-called leader break apart in front of everyone. You didn't say anything. You didn't ask for fairness. There was no need for you to say anything back. The truth came out in its most honest form. And the fall happened straight away. The leader whom people used to look up to started to trip, become defensive, and make blunders that they couldn't hide anymore. Just like that, the illusion fell apart. Stop clapping. No more help. People who used to row hard for them started to give each other strange looks. They could see it now. They've been following someone who was making a lot of noise. Not a good idea. Brave, but empty. A puppet of the self. Not a very deep person. The craziest part, you didn't just inform one person. You kicked a lot of people out of the imaginary kingdom they were living in without intending to. It was a way for the spirit to clear itself out. They got a call to wake up. They had sworn to remain devoted to someone who didn't actually have any authority. And when that power broke apart, everything changed for them. Loyalty turned into agony. What began as respect turned into embarrassment. The group's enthusiasm quickly waned. The toughest thing for them was finding out that they made fun of the wrong individual. They didn't think much of the one who was silent, the one they thought they could manage. But now the truth is out there for everyone to see. And the one they used to make fun of is now standing tall, calm, and right. The leader didn't just get captured. They were booted out for moral concerns. Because their spiritual lease was up, the whole crew had to sit in the fallout and choke on the smoke of their wrong commitment. That's not revenge. That's what it means to be in divine alignment. Catching up with false power. 5. You didn't kill them. Truth did. You just happened to live long enough to witness it. They did all they could to make you quit. They told lies, made up stories, twisted the facts, and tried to make you seem like the problem. They were convinced of their lies because they imagined you wouldn't be around long enough to ask them about them. They didn't only want to hurt you. It was to put you behind a phony portrait. But here's the thing, you didn't just get through it. You lasted longer than the lie. And that's what did them in. You see, a lie is weak. They can only be found in locations where there is no truth. But you stayed. You kept coming back. You kept doing the same thing. You didn't say anything, even while things were going wild around you. And that slow, steady persistence started to do what no argument could. It sucked the life out of them. Because you didn't fight back every time you took a breath. Their narrative became lighter. People started to notice the problems, the contradictions, and the strained atmosphere they felt every time they heard your name. You didn't have to say anything. Life did. It was time. Truth did. They had to keep moving their mask around because you wouldn't go beneath, which caused it start to slip. They had no idea how dangerous your power was. Not too loud. Power. Not the loud kind that proclaims, "I'm still standing," but the peaceful, steady kind that makes people pause and consider. If they really were the problem, why haven't they broken yet? They died because you lived. Every day. You wouldn't give up, and every time you walked into a place with peace in your heart, their story got less believable. Their phony confidence shook a little more. In the end, it was clear that they weren't the ones who were hurt. They were in charge of a failed takedown. That's the disgrace they never saw coming. You shouldn't be angry or desire to get even. You are still here, still standing, and still whole. And now everyone who used to believe the lie has to confront the reality that has always been true. You didn't kill them. You didn't need to. The actual life merely went on longer than the show. 6th, they made you the joke until the universe changed the plot. For a long time, you were their favorite target. They always made fun of you. They named you. Something to laugh at and make fun of in front of other people. Just to get a reaction, some cheap praise, or a little boost to their ego. They wanted everyone to believe you were weak, lost, uncomfortable, or not significant because making fun of you made them feel strong. It was never really about you. They did it because they had to feel better than other people. But they didn't know anything useful. The universe doesn't let wrongs endure forever. By labeling you foolish, they thought they were telling your story. But the story altered, and they had no idea it was going to happen. What they didn't understand was that while they were trying to make you seem like a nobody, the truth was slowly coming to light behind the scenes. When the curtains went down, you were the star and others were just background noise. Life has a way of altering things. You didn't have to get even with them. You didn't have to show anything. People who used to laugh with them started to see through the charade. It wasn't funny anymore. But it was terribly sad. They kept telling the same joke over and again. But now the audience is cringing instead of clapping. Why? Because the truth came out. Growth made it. The proper timing from God. They pulled back the curtain and saw that the person they were making fun of was the one who actually mattered. You didn't change to get respect. You always deserved it. The problem was that they thought of themselves as how they treated you. Now that the narrative has altered, they have no proof. They felt better about themselves after humiliating you. And now that people know the truth, their whole personality is breaking apart. The irony. They made you the butt of the joke, but life altered the tale. Now they are the joke. And not because you're laughing at them, but because the universe made sure they were terrible to you and crafted its own ending. You were never the dumb one. You were the story's twist. And now everyone is watching the drama unfold with their mouths wide. 7. The embarrassment wasn't only in front of people, it was all around. Not only did they lose face, but something more happened. The end of phony power has come. It wasn't just a bad day, a strange moment, or a little social difficulty. What they went through was a cosmic correction, a heavenly shutdown of a system that was built on lies and ego. They felt embarrassed in front of other people too. They were spiritually bare. At that time, their voice cracked as they stuttered, and the room became silent. It wasn't simply being worried. The spirit changed, the cosmos cutting off borrowed energy. They labored under a fake light for a long time. They spoke with confidence that wasn't theirs, grabbed attention by putting others down, and maintained in power by creating stories that kept them in charge. And for a while, it seemed like it may work. They fooled people. They had admirers. They were there. But they didn't realize that everything built on falsehoods would inevitably come apart. And when it was time, the universe made sure it was apparent. It was something I will always remember. It happened just as it should have. There was no drama, no firestorm, and no physical struggle. Just a startling, clear emptiness. People stopped paying attention to their energy. Their jokes lost their rhythm, and their aura disappeared. It was like the air itself turned away. That's because you can't pretend to be spiritually in charge forever. When God says enough is enough, it is. Even the most confident criminals tend to stutter. They weren't just seen. They were released. Not by you. Not by humans, but by something bigger. They lost the phony power source that gave them electricity. And that's the part they will never be able to explain. That day, they sensed something was gone. Things were different. That confidence that used to come so easily now feels forced. They used to be able to rule people, but now they can't. The truth. You didn't do it. The Most High did. And when God does anything, even the greatest clamor turns into a whisper. It wasn't only humiliating in front of other people. It was a full spiritual exodus. Your calmness wasn't the same as being silent. It was exquisite self-control. You had every right to hit back, speak the truth, and drag their name through the mud as they did to yours. You know, things that may have wrecked their reputation in a couple of seconds. But you didn't say anything. Not because you didn't want to, but because something within you told you to. That didn't mean you were weak. You weren't scared. That was amazing self-control. You didn't stay silent. You were standing motionless, even though you wanted to do anything. And because of this, heaven did things for you that your words could never do. God doesn't want you to put up with disrespect when He tells you to be still. It's because He's getting ready for something bigger. Something that is worse than being embarrassed in public. You could have hurt their feelings, but God broke them down. You could have showed them, but God took away their insides. When the divine enters in, it's not about making a point. It's about making a choice. That's why it hurts so much. That explains why everything seemed off. People couldn't believe that someone who was so loud, self-important, and sure of themselves could come apart so rapidly in front of everyone. But they didn't know what was going on in the spirit. A complete stripping of false authority, a collapse of the ego, and a divine erasure of all the power they gained by lies. And you didn't need to do anything. Just because you were calm didn't imply you didn't care. It showed that you knew who was on your side. You didn't say anything since you understood that injustice doesn't always make a sound. What happened next? It was more than simply feeling bad. It pained me deeply. One that an apology can't mend and one that a good name can't fix. They'll remember that moment not just because they were embarrassed, but also because they realized they had messed with someone who was backed by heaven. Words didn't help you win. You won by standing in line, and it will always hurt more than anything else could. Number 9, they wanted praise for being disrespectful, but instead they got a wake-up call. They really thought that making you seem awful would make them famous. They strode in with a sneer, harsh voice, and an attitude that made it seem like they were on stage. You could see it was there for all of them. They assumed other people would laugh, clap, and maybe even cheer them on. They believed this was their time to finally put you in your place. There was too much ego. They had set up the performance and were sure that the audience would appreciate it. But the universe has other plans. Instead of acclaim, they got silence. The kind that makes you feel horrible. The kind that makes you feel foolish straight immediately. People looked around. Eyes dropped. The individuals who used to laugh weren't even smiling. The atmosphere spoke everything, therefore there was no need to say anything. The room turned cold. The feeling altered. That's what happens when someone thinks being cruel is fun and gets caught doing it. They weren't joking. They were trying to ruin your reputation in front of a lot of people. They didn't make a joke. They simply handed me a phone. And it smacked the ground hard. When someone tries to hide their hate with humor and it doesn't succeed, they are left with nothing but a bitter person with no morals. They thought they were clever. They thought they were acting. But all they did was illustrate how much they needed help. This wasn't a joke. It was an unsuccessful attempt to be important. And halfway through the concert, the universe snatched the mic away. Nobody clapped. Nobody laughed. The sound of people shifting about in their seats as they learned the actual clown wasn't the one being targeted. The one who spoke the most was the one. That catastrophe didn't only end their little routine. It revealed how empty it was. They came to take away your dignity and left with their own ego shattered. They didn't feel bad when they heard the silence. It was God's judgment, telling them the show was over. People felt you were emotionally weak since you didn't speak out. They assumed you were weak because you were so silent. In this shallow world, the strongest voice has to be the loudest. The one who is the most fearless should be in command. The one who bites back the hardest must be in command. They felt you were weak since you didn't shout, argue, or do anything. Because you didn't match their idea of power, they thought they could walk all over you, make fun of you, and challenge you. But they didn't understand that your silence didn't indicate you were giving in. There was a plan. It was being able to manage yourself. It was the kind of inner strength that doesn't need other people to feel good about it. You weren't quiet because you didn't have the words or the fire. You didn't say anything since you knew how important you were. You let them converse, show off, and play games while you played a separate game. One where power doesn't have to do anything. It simply exists. And when the time is right, it alters everything. They were drunk on attention and assumed that making noise meant they were in command. But they didn't think the tide would turn so rapidly when the quiet power finally spoke out. You didn't yell. You raised the bar. You didn't fight back. You let the truth do the heavy job. And when their little kingdom fell apart, what wounded them the most was your dignity. They thought that being modest meant you were scared. They thought that being kind meant you would let them go. But they learned the hard way that real ones don't bark to indicate how strong they are. They move in a different manner. And as they move, all of the illusions break down. Everyone had to go deeper because you were so calm. It demonstrated how really insecure they were. They believed you would give in, but they broke instead because you didn't say anything. And at that time, they finally saw that you were never weak. You were just too wonderful for them. Number. You didn't just win. You altered the people they hang out with. They thought that if they brought you down, they would be better. Their whole personality, their self-esteem, and their sense of power. It all hinged on having you under them, whether they were making fun of you in a sneaky way, giving you false praise, or showing you public scorn that was really just playful teasing. They fed their egos by making you feel that you should never shine too brightly or ascend too high. But as soon as they took off their masks, the truth started to come out. Everything they built on your guilt was crashing apart all around them. It wasn't particularly loud either. It wasn't a huge deal. It was slow and spiritual, but there was no denying it. People who used to laugh with them stopped talking to them. The same group talks that used to make them psyched about their comebacks ceased being entertaining. They thought the respect was dedication, but it was actually simply easy. And now that the tide has turned, so has the circle around them. People started to ponder again, watch, and go back. Maybe they weren't the strong one after all. They may not be who I thought they were. That's the price of phony confidence. It doesn't last in real light, and they were aware of it. They could feel the life departing. People were talking to them in a different manner, and they could tell. Not directly, but via the awkward silence, the sudden busy signals, and the plans that fell through. The alteration was little, but quite noticeable. And they know what really caused it to happen. You weren't the only one, Russ. It's because your ascent revealed them for who they really are. It proved how unjust and dishonest they had been for years in the show they had been putting on. People who used to cheer for their bad behavior are now keeping away because they don't want to be connected to the end. Someone instructed them to be less social, but that wasn't why they did it. It was because you altered the frequency. You became a mirror, and being near to you made it impossible to ignore their imperfections. That's why they don't feel well right now. That's why they think they have more to deal with. People don't just not like it anymore. It implies giving up power. For someone who lived off of power and beauty, this is a collapse they never saw coming. You didn't just win. You destroyed a phony kingdom. And the impacts are still there. Number. They weren't just embarrassed. They were stripped of their spiritual clothing. This wasn't just a moment of embarrassment. It wasn't a mistake, a joke that went wrong, or anything that occurred by coincidence that made you feel bad. This was a collapse at the soul level. What happened to them was the end of a well-planned and maintained illusion that had been around for years. That bossy attitude made them think they were untouchable. That spiritual mask they wore to seem smarter, stronger, and superior than everyone else. And everything came off in a second. And the worst part, they couldn't handle it. They couldn't fix it. They couldn't persuade people to pay attention again since the mood in the room had already altered. People could see right through them. And you can't just put your mask back on once people have seen you without it. They were spiritually bare and open. When the truth came out, all of their fake power fell apart. And all of a sudden, people didn't fear, love, or respect them anymore. People stared at them in a startled silence that indicated, "We thought you were better than this." It wasn't only what people saw that made it so horrible. It's what people didn't notice. They didn't know what they were talking about. They didn't have any power behind their presence, and they didn't have any spiritual backing behind the image they were putting out. They donned costumes to seem calm, confident, and divine, but it was all a lie. When all was over, all that was left was raw insecurity, an empty shell striving to gain back a persona that had never been genuine. This wasn't a reduction in how popular it was. It was a great stripping. They didn't only lose their reputation. They no longer felt in command. They used to be able to modify the weather, and now they can't get rid of them. Not by you, but by the sound of a room that no longer cares about them. They keep thinking about that moment, not because of what you did, but because of what they lost. A spiritual basis, credibility, and presence. You didn't take off their garments. The truth did. And now the people they were attempting to impress may see them clearly, not as a leader or a giant, but as a ghost of someone who built an empire on vanity and was thrown out of paradise. The second light struck it. Number. You didn't take away their control. You proved that they never had any. They never saw this plot twist coming. You didn't come here to fight. You didn't fight back against them. You didn't intend to get back at them. You just kept being honest. That's it. You walked in the truth. You were honest. You let time and alignment do what your lips never had to perform. And at some point, all the smoke they were blowing to intimidate, control, and rule people started to fade away. What was left wasn't power. Everything was phony. They never really had power. They rented it out, and the lease just expired. They thought they could obtain what they wanted from you because they were louder, flashier, better connected, or more liked. They assumed that sounds from outside was substance from within. They thought you were underneath them. You didn't clap back, you didn't get involved in their drama, and you didn't stoop to their level. But they didn't understand that real power doesn't have to show off. That's exactly how it is. You didn't become smaller. You just didn't go along with them. And that's what revealed the truth. They never actually had power. The change didn't happen when you went back to them. It happened when you were motionless. They raced around in circles trying to seem busy, but you kept quiet. And in the end, the cracks showed. In fact, the longer you sat still, the more their dream began to break apart. There was nothing real behind their strength, and there was nothing holy behind it. And when things became hard, they quit. Not because you took something away from them, but because there was nothing there to start with. And it was the worst part. The fact that they thought they had power because of fear, lies, and other people's ignorance. They lost control over everyone around them as the illusion wore off. That's why it feels like a spiritual bankruptcy after the fact. You didn't win against them. You revealed that what they were claiming to be wasn't real. You didn't win because you were too powerful for them. You triumphed because the truth finally came into the room and took away their bogus power without any trouble. That's not just being seen. That's wonderful. Number of changes. They laughed at first, but now you're the one who hasn't done anything wrong. They were the loudest individuals in the room, and they joked about you like it was free entertainment. They laughed first, hard and with pride, thinking that by putting you down, they were making themselves seem better. The whole atmosphere said, this one is an easy target, and for a while it seemed like they were winning. People were paying attention. A few individuals joined in. Some folks just sat back and let the taunting happen. But you didn't even blink. You didn't give them a hard time. You didn't have to dig into the dirt to get soil that was the same level as theirs. You just stood there without moving. That was the thing that confused them the most. They assumed you would react, become upset, or lash out. But not saying anything didn't imply you were weak. God gave him strength. You didn't fight back because you knew something deep inside. No, they didn't. A lot of the time, people who use their words as weapons injure themselves. And that's exactly what happened. It wasn't the lightning or thunder that gave them away. There wasn't a huge bang. It was the slow, clear breaking apart that their own words caused. The comments they used to make you feel awful ended up hurting their own reputation. People stopped paying attention to what you said and started paying attention to what you didn't say. And there, the reality became extremely loud. And now you're still there. You don't have any blood on your hands, any receipts in your pocket, or any remorse in your heart. You never had to hurt your spirit to defend your name. That kind of power is different since it doesn't come from revenge. It works well with self-control. They believed there would be a war. You gave them serenity. And that silence revealed everything. They can only hear what they did now. Their remarks come back to them like a boomerang that they can't catch. Their laughter is vacuous. The individuals who pay attention to them, not there anymore. What about you? You can't be touched. Not because you fought harder, but because you never had to bow down. You hurt their feelings without being cruel. And that kind of grace, it hurts more than retribution ever could. They came to harm you, but in the end they revealed you who they truly were. Every insult, every show, and every frenzied attempt to make you seem unimportant. In the end, it only had one purpose, to convey the calm, undeniable power you've always had. You didn't only get past the campaigns of defamation. You pulled them apart without lifting a finger, matching their pettiness, or even bothering to think. What they didn't understand is that real power doesn't have to shout. It doesn't bend. It doesn't seek revenge. It stands still and lets the lies fall apart on their own. And that's exactly what happened. It wasn't because you fought back that their character broke apart. It was because you were there that the show couldn't go on. They embarrassed themselves by not knowing how safe, guided, and divinely controlled someone was. You were not just correct. You didn't rise up because you were powerful. You did it because you were honest. Their artificial image broke apart in more than one manner, both socially and spiritually. The crowd witnessed it. The mood altered. And no amount of bravado could pull the mask back on when it had slipped. You're here now, calm, clean, and still. As they battled to win back an identity that was never founded on anything real, the story shifted. Not because you lied, but because you were honest. And that kind of answer, it doesn't just hurt, it remains with you. Please subscribe to the channel, like this video, and leave a comment below if you appreciated this message. Sharing your story with other people. Tell someone who has ever been made fun of, underestimated, or misunderstood about this. Be honest with them. Always outlast the quiet ones and the spectacle. They produce noise like thunder. If this message hit home, don't keep it to yourself. Subscribe to the channel so you never miss another word that makes you stronger and feeds your spirit. Click the like button if you sense the power in this. Please leave a comment below to share your thoughts with everyone. Someone else may need to hear about what you've been through to make a huge shift. And don't forget to give this video to someone who has been through a lot and come out on top. Let them know they're not alone. And in the end, the truth always wins. This is a place for real people like the warriors and the silent giants. We get up and move in different ways. And as we converse, the mood changes. May God bless you.